The war for talent is over, or is it? Our clients are increasingly telling us that their battle is now to retain the talent they have. What part does your talent development strategy play in talent acquisition, internal mobility, and employee retention? Is AI a trend you're wondering how to implement into talent management, or already a game changer in your organization? Do you agree that it's an employee's market and well-being and employee experience and development pathways need to be a priority? How to create one strategy for the multitude of challenges can feel overwhelming. Well, fear not. We have the perfect podcast guest to talk through some of these topics. Welcome, Andy MacGovern, to join us in good company today. How are you?
Good, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's a delight to have you here, and we're very excited to get into this today. So let's start with our podcast the way we always do, which is to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Okay, I guess I haven't had a traditional career path, that's for sure. I started life in the military, in the parachute regiment, and then spent a number of years living and working out in Asia, doing security consulting for large global multinationals. And then the loose thread that's kind of held it all together has been just a fascination with what gets teams to perform well. So I started to move into physical security, then electronic security, and then the change management elements associated with that, as it was typically where things would always break down and not work. The technology would actually be pretty good, but for some reason things wouldn't work. So that was really how I got started, and then just moved through a series of different roles in the learning and development and talent management space for global multinationals. Mm-hmm. I've been living in France for 20 years, and most of my clients are kind of global in the same way that Impact's clients are global as well. It's just been a really interesting journey. It's still going. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're excited to kind of pick your brains a bit today. So let's get straight into it, I guess. So in your words then, how do you define talent management, and why is it critical for an organization's long-term success?
It's really interesting. When you start to have a look at it, there's a couple of things that leap out when you look at other people's definitions. And they're typically that they will have process in that definition lots of times. Right. And for me, there are elements of process that are pulled through that, but that should never be the starting point. So I think for me, talent management is really about the development of teams and capabilities that enable you to put the right people into the right place at the right time to deliver the best business outcomes. And that's really what's at the heart of any good talent strategy, is really how does it drive the business? How does it help the business to have better impacts for its stakeholders? And the process piece for me is, and I'm sure we'll come back onto this a few times, but it's the bit that actually kills a lot of the effectiveness, is that overuse of process in the talent strategy, and losing sight with what the business needs, and how those requirements are evolving all the time. So that's probably how I'd loosely define that.
And so, from what I understand, you talk to CEOs of what you've already described, big multinationals, and you talk to CEOs about talent on a daily basis. What would you say then at the moment are the biggest challenges that those organizations are facing in managing their talent?
I think it's multifaceted. So there's a lot of different things that are hitting all at the same time. A part of it is normally the CEOs are very focused on their own leadership teams. Right. A lot of the clients that I'm working with have leadership teams where quite a big percentage of that leadership team is probably going to be leaving the organization within the next 5 to 10 years. And the areas that they struggle with at that level is working out how to get their succession working in a meaningful and effective way. So how can you make sure that, again, in terms of business outcomes, a business isn't interrupted because you've lost a leader that's been doing a great job for a long time? So that tends to be top of the agenda into when they start looking at their own team. And then there's a lot of focus and attention as well put on how do we keep the good people, and how do we attract the good people into our organisation. What do we need to do differently to make sure that we're attracting and then keeping the right people in the organisation for the right amount of time?
Yeah. And and so presumably what you mean by that is that, just for me to understand, that people aren't necessarily looking at retaining talent, where it might be that those people have potential to. Is that right? Is that fair? Is that a fair kind of understanding of what you were talking about? They're focusing on the people that are already showing that, or already demonstrating the skills that are required by them, but not necessarily exploring what potential other people have. Is that right?
I think a lot of companies have taken quite a traditional approach to their succession planning, and it will be in the form of a file that's probably held on in the cloud now through one of the big HRIS suppliers. But it's kicking the tires on what that plan looks like, so that when the move has to happen and you have to replace somebody, that you've got all of the pieces lined up to make sure that person is going to hit the ground running and be able to take over really effectively and doing a really good job. Sometimes when there's been very little notice that person's going to go. So the potential of employees is something that's really, really important. And again, it's something that organizations struggle with. A lot of the time, in my experience, that's because they're spending almost too much time worrying about the definitions. And what definition goes. If they're still using a 9-box, I was talking to a client last week that got rid of the 9-box about 5 years ago. They've had a change in CHRO. They're now back with the 9-box. And it's one of the things that in general, I think organizations struggle with is what do we mean about people that are performing at a high potential level, and then what do we do with them? So it's something that it's not something that's really, I wouldn't say has got a lot worse. It's just something that organizations just continually tend to struggle with.
And are you noticing these trends in particular sectors or geographies, or is this a universal issue?
No, I think this is universal.
Right.
My clients are across multiple sectors, and they're all struggling with very similar situations. It's where the focus is can be different, particularly given, like I say, the demographic of the leadership team. Have they got a high number of people in there, heading towards retirement age? Then that's when the focus could potentially get put onto that. But then there's the ongoing challenge with how do we get younger, more dynamic talent into the organisation, and how can we make an organisation that might be led by people with a more traditional perspective on things. How can we make it exciting for the people that are just literally finishing their studies or just come out of school? And we want them to give us a good few years, and we want them to develop in a really meaningful way in the organisation and to have really good careers for however long it suits them. That's a challenge.
I mean, it's been fascinating to kind of see the approach to. I mean, you only have to look at people's LinkedIns to see how generationally, like the people would stay in a company for 20 odd years, and then now it's like every 2 years it might move to a new role, with a younger generation. So that's really interesting, and but I'm sure
it is.
Do you think then that there's a particular? What so far maybe have you found as the knack to both retain people that are already in the? Well, maybe it's too big a question, and then of course there's the attracting that new talent. Is it, maybe what we should talk about is some of the keys. First is the key strategies that companies can use to implement and improve that retention. So let's talk about that, because we looked at we've been sort of talking with our clients and finding out what the percentage is, and that we've got a figure here. Some industries and employers, I think it's over 40% that they want to retain. But so what then would you say are some of the key strategies that companies can implement to improve their talent retention?
I think they've got to be authentic. So there's no point in having an externally facing employee value proposition that then doesn't live up to it as soon as somebody hits the ground. in the organisation, because they'll work that out on day one or day two. So that's an important piece, is that you're not over-promising, particularly to people that are newer in their careers. They have a lot of options. That's the other thing. As you said, people traditionally would build a long career in one organisation, or maybe two organisations, and if you were moving around every few years, then that was seen as potentially, you'd be asking questions, and why is that person moving so often? And now for me, that the flip of that is true. So actually having people that are moving on to definitely new roles within the organisation within a couple of years is very, 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 very important. But potentially just making sure that you are developing talent in a way that they have a fantastic few years with you, and then might go off and broaden their experiences in another organisation, in another industry or another region. They'll come back if they've been treated really well. Yeah. So there's something about making sure that you're not clinging on to that desperately to the fact that you want them there for 20 years, because the reality is that's just not going to happen. What can you do to deliver meaningful experiences for them throughout the day that will help them to want to stay with you and want to give more as well? There was a really interesting study, it's quite old now, I think it was the Corporate Executive Board, right, that showed that if you had a highly engaged team, that highly engaged team would give you an extra 20% non-discretionary effort throughout the week. So if you've got a big team of people, and essentially they're giving you an extra day a week in effort because they love what they're doing, they're being engaged with and led in a meaningful way, then that's super important. So that's why I think talent management sometimes gets in the way of itself, because it does focus too much on the processes and making sure that all the boxes are ticked, so they can say we have 3 people in the succession plan for this VP. And they need to be thinking a little bit more about what they do to make sure that every day is meaningful. So how do you get those leaders to behave in a way, and particularly some of the leaders that are come through a more traditional development experience and more traditional career experiences, how do you get them to engage in a different way with people deeper in their workforce, so that they're seeing that as well?
And I think that it's been really interesting. As we recorded this, we recorded another episode yesterday with Will Langston from the Timpson Group, and he was saying that they have, and this goes right the way across the organization, that they measure happiness with a happiness index, and it's simple as just checking in with everybody within the organization, if not weekly, then daily, just checking in. And that, going back to what you were saying earlier about if people feel happy in their organization, then they're more likely to either stay with the organization, develop through the organization, or at the very least, they'll probably come back if they were to move to another, and I think if you're just paying attention to that detail, it's so important. And also
they'll talk to other people, Dan, as well.
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
That's the other thing. So this is where it connects in an interesting and meaningful way to talent acquisition.
Yeah,
is that they will talk about that to other people, and they will also post out how they're experiencing things on things like Glassdoor. So the technology is there to really scale those positive experiences and the negative experiences in a quite significant way, which is why it is so important.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm pleased you brought up technology there, because that leads me nicely into our next question, which is around AI, which is a hot topic at the moment, as I have no doubt you'll be aware. And of course, as AI is developing, so is the integration into organizations. And so what do you see as the role for tech such as AI playing in talent acquisition? Do you think it's helpful? Is it game changing? Can it be efficient, or is it just dangerous? What do you think?
I don't think it's dangerous, but I think you need to know what you're doing with it. So I think that's one of the things that organizations should be investing in right now, is to start to build that base understanding of what AI is, what AI means to, again, back to the business, not necessarily just to the HR function. and start investing in that development so people really get their heads around it, because it's not going to go away. But there's a lot of myths and legends in there at the moment about what it will and it won't deliver. There is no doubt that it's going to affect HR in a significant way. I think that most of that is going to be really beneficial. So if you think about, it's much broader than talent acquisition as well, but if you think about talent acquisition, organizations, recruiters are doing a brilliant job and trying the best that they can to get the right candidates in front of the hiring managers as quickly as possible so that you can get the right talent into the role. And I think the research has shown that typically they're spending 6 to 7 seconds having a quick look at the CV to do that first pass, that first filter. There's different data points on it, but it's, they're not spending 5 minutes reading a CV. It's seconds. And obviously, as humans, we're not going to be able to do that as effectively as technology will be able to do it. We have biases. We will be looking at things in a certain way. If we're having a tough day at the office, we're probably going to be even less effective than we would be if we were, we'd had a good night's sleep and we were doing well. And that's just one example of where I think AI is really going to start to make a difference. So it is going to be able to take some of those processes that can be done much better by technology, and it's going to really turbocharge those. So that, as an example, is going to be really good. And the positive news for that, I think, is it doesn't necessarily mean that talent acquisition as a function is all of a sudden going to go away and it's all going to be delivered by technology. For me, it gets interesting then, because then your recruiters can be spending more time looking at other areas in that chain that need attention to make sure that you're hiring in the right way and hiring the right people. So as an example, if you've got the best recruiter in the world and they're providing great CVs into the hiring manager, in lots of cases, and I'm sure people will relate to this, that the hiring managers find it difficult. That they've got a full-time job. They're not sitting there gleefully waiting for however many CVs to land that they've got to start having a look through. So starting to engage with the business, which is the most important thing, in a more meaningful way than just reviewing CVs, is an example of where I think AI is going to really help. So a lot of those processes where we can speed things up and deliver good outcomes quicker and better, I think is really good. And all of the big players, Workday and SuccessFactors, all of those guys are investing heavily to make sure that their platforms are going to be able to do that. And then you have a look at other organisations. If you think about Lightcast as an example, so Chris Kabarian, the CEO there, building a fantastic team of people, and just massively oversimplifying, but they are able to extract a huge amount of data from lots of different things and convert that into data that the business can use to much more effectively do things like workforce management. So understanding who's hiring where, what's going on in the economy that might affect us, and how we need to respond. So again, organisations like that really exciting in terms of that potential that they can provide. So yeah, it's not just talent acquisition; it's across the board. I think this is going to be helpful. The skills development piece, again, just huge. It's something that organisations have typically struggled with. It's looking at how you develop those skills. How do you map skills to roles? How do you make sure that people are being developed against those? How can you look forwards and make sure that you're developing the skills that are going to be required in 3 years, 5 years time? So all of that, I think, is going to be helped. But there's a little bit of a health warning in terms of ask for references would be my recommendation. Don't
I mean, there's so much to kind of unpick there, which we probably don't have time for really, but I'm fascinated by, I'd kind of love to see that process go through and compare it to like the more traditional way of doing it, and not necessarily looking at it from a time efficiency point of view, but looking at it as an overall quality of, does it bring in better talent by going through a process that uses AI, or is there that whole thing of trusting your gut, going with, that type of process, which is arguably a more human approach to and that's not to say one's better than the other. I'm just, I'm curious to kind of see whether, if we become, I'm a bit of strangely, I'm a little bit of an AI skeptic, only because I feel that there is the risk if it's not used with caution. And as you've just point there, is that we come too reliant on it, which we have done for a lot of technology, arguably anyway. But and this is obviously my personal opinion, but it's the using it sensibly and ethically and that type of thing. And if I was to go for a job and essentially whether I got it was decided by a computer, I don't know if that meant that there was the same level of trust, for example, as there would have been had it been. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sure there'd be that balance that would I'm sure you'd have that balance to make it feel right. But of course, there's this. It's an interesting to see the way the world's going, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, and it's not going to stop.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I think we've got to get ready for it and embrace and like I say, build those capabilities around that in the organisation. So that so if a new technology is being proposed, then you've got enough knowledge to be able to ask the right questions, so you're making the right decisions. But like I say, that there are some. I think the broader talent management HR community is extremely generous with their time and with their expertise sharing, and that's where I would encourage people, if they're looking to get started, would be to have a look at who's done it already. And have a conversation.
And look at the success stories,
exactly, and find out what you need, what the size of that is going to look like, and so that you can start making sensible bets on that technology. And again, I'm going to sound really boring saying it, but ultimately, just continually asking yourself, how is this going to have a meaningful impact on the business's bottom line?
And I think that there's a key word there being meaningful, because of course that can infer different things, and I suppose on the bottom line, obviously it's just fascinating. And I feel like that's a rabbit hole I could definitely go down, which I'm going to rein myself in. But I did want to ask you also about, because interestingly, we've done a little bit of research into kind of what people are searching for still in terms of, I guess, the leadership that they might be trying to. What am I trying to say here? I might rephrase this question. So I will. We've done a bit of research into recent searches that on Google that are relevant to the work that we're doing, and I wanted to get your opinion on something. So, remote working and I guess hybrid working as part of that are recent trends, and that got us thinking that. And whilst we've got you, to ask you about, have you got any particular advice about how what we've talked about so far? Any advice on retention, but also from a remote perspective? Because we as a business that have been in operation for 40 years understand the power of face to face and the power that feeling as part of a community in that sense. But ultimately, that's got to be a lot harder through remote connection. So what advice, if any, have you got on talent retention in the remote world that we now have?
I think it kind of plays to impact strengths. Actually, for me, it's all about those underlying capabilities in the leadership team and in the management teams, whether it's remote or whether it's face to face. Having the right sort of discussions at the right time in the right way is super important. And that is something that I still think companies underinvest in. And this is where the technology and the investment in people sometimes, I think, can get a little bit messy. If you look at performance management as an example, most of the performance management modules of the HRS platforms are moving much more towards more regular feedback. So don't have your objective setting beginning of the year, mid-year review, end of year review, those 3 touch points. It needs to be much more regular than that, so that the employee understands how they're getting on. So basically there's no surprises, and also so that you can keep providing that feedback. Now, and I've seen this in a lot of organizations, where that can go badly wrong if your managers are not able to have meaningful developmental conversations with people about their performance. if you're suddenly taking a 3 times a year frequency and converting it into every month, and every single one of those interactions is negative because the leader or the manager is not able to, doesn't know how to have that conversation in the most appropriate way, then that's not good for the organization. It will not be good for attrition levels. It won't be good for the engagement, and you'll see it have a material impact on the organization. So I think this is where people, when you're starting to put new platforms in place, new processes in place as a result of technology implementation, do not forget to invest heavily in those capabilities that are going to be really important. I'm part of I'm really lucky. I've been part of a PhD a research program for about the last 5 years with one of my old bosses, Corinne from PPG, and the PhD is about meaning. And we've been examining for the last 5 years what creates and what destroys meaning. And it's really, really interesting. I won't get into the detail of it now, but there are some themes that emerge from the people that we spoke to and from the research that we looked at, including quite often it can be destroyed by processes. It can be destroyed by managers and by leaders. Those touch points and the ability to spend lots of time, as an example, in a reflective way before you start to engage with people is really important. And just given the nature of work and the way that most corporates are just moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, you sometimes, particularly if you're under stress, you're going to be inadvertently probably sometimes affecting people's meaning, how they derive meaning from their work, how they're feeling about you as their manager, how they're feeling about the organization. So I think that's super important to not lose sight of. The technology is exciting. It's going to transform the way that things are done, but definitely keep the focus on developing those skills in those leadership teams and in those management teams.
Yeah. And that's such a human trait, isn't it? Meaning, because even when we talk about AI bots and the capabilities of AI are staggering, you know, and I like, there's a particular tech reviewer on YouTube that I often watch his content, and he put it extremely well, is that right now, right this second, is the worst that this technology is ever going to be.
Right.
And it's a really fascinating way when you start thinking about it. It's like but totally accurate that, you know, and there was a particular video he was using to demonstrate that, which just 1 year ago, there was an AI video of, I never saw it actually. It went viral though, apparently, which was a video of Will Smith eating pizza that AI had generated. And you see some of the content that comes out now, but to the computer, that means nothing. Like, that is not, you know, so you know what I mean? It's like somebody has typed in the prompt, but that's that importance of meaning. I mean, when you were talking there, it was almost like you were doing an advert for us, because our leadership model is inherent around meaning, value, and structure, and we talk about that as well in some of our other episodes. So I do feel a shameless plug coming on, but you know what I mean. I'll try and resist. But and I think that in there, lies a bit of hope, I guess, because it's that, you know, where people may be worried about AI and the future of AI and it taking over jobs and things, like you've just said, until you apply meaning to a lot of the technology that may be used, or to any situation, then it's just such an important aspect to have in an organization.
The other thing that I think is interesting, and it's a big focus of you guys as well, is really looking at sustainability. And that's started to bubble away a little bit more now. But I think organizations are going to start to ask more questions on that in terms of the implications of really driving AI hard through everything and the cost to the environment. It's quite interesting when you start to have a look at what's going on there. In terms of the, you know, just the energy consumption and water consumption that's required to keep all of those new data centers that are being built with the AI capabilities to keep them running. So that's something I think people are going to have to also just keep an eye on as well, because there's huge benefits. But we've got to get smarter on the sustainability. We can't lose sight of that either. We've got to, really challenge hard to make sure that those technology companies are continuing to look at smarter ways of doing that as well.
And I think going back to what you were saying earlier about the sustainability, what's the best way of putting it? An organization's approach to sustainability is massively important. And I think it's a big part of organizational culture. Where in terms, so I mean, we've talked about, we've not necessarily talked about the word culture when we've talked about talent management, but it's so important, and it kind of sums up what you've been talking about through answering these questions. But in terms of, in your own words, how important is culture to retaining talent?
It's hugely important. Yeah, you can't put too much of a priority on it. But again, it's similar to your employee value proposition to your externally facing one to get people to join you. It's got to be authentic. And it's got to be built by everybody. So I've seen some organizations do this really, really effectively, and some organizations that have had really good intent but haven't really executed it as they wanted to. So a top-down approach to building a really strong culture is challenging. It's going to be tough for most organizations. But also, it's also the little pieces. I think sometimes organizations approach this, particularly if they're wanting to change or modify their culture, they approach it in a way that is very programmatic. So They treat it like a big leadership development program. Okay, we're going to create a set of new values and we're going to roll it out to everybody. So this is the steps that we're going to do, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. And culture in an organization is created in lots of different ways. And again, it comes back, a big part of that culture is going to be your leaders and managers of teams as well, understanding how they show up at work, how they show up with their teams. Yeah. It's not just the stuff that's articulated in artifacts like posters and stuff that's, the visual stuff that you see when you're launching something. It's how people show up on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And it's the way that they interact with their teams. It's the way that they have conversations with each other. That is a critical component of creating culture. And that, again, that's something that I think there's lots of different things that you can be doing there. But organizations that invest heavily in helping individuals throughout their career have a much better understanding of themselves is something that will really help with that as well.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into that then. So if you were to give one piece of advice to share that to anyone that is looking to implement a talent management strategy, for example, what would that one piece of advice be?
I'm going to take it back to the business again and be boring, but make sure that the business is getting the value that it wants out of it. Right. So everything that you do should be driving the organization's bottom line, and you should be challenging yourself on that. There's been some really interesting research that's kind of looked at how much does it cost an enterprise on a per employee basis to do a talent review, and the range is quite big. It's and understandably so. It's between $5,000 and $500. Right, that's how much it costs per employee. Mm-hmm. So even if you're a bit, let's lowball it a little bit and say we won't go in the middle, but we'll say, it's $1,000 per employee. When you look at the time that they spend, the managers spend, the technology, every single component of that. If you look at that and then multiply that across a 20,000 person organization, that's a scary number. And if you go back to the business and say, right, we can do the talent review this year, or you can have your share of this pot, then it's a simplistic way to do it. But most leaders that I've met would say, I'll take the money, please, because they haven't managed to get to that stage where they can definitively see the value that they're getting from it. And a big part of that is on execution. it's making sure that when you're finishing the process, it never really finishes, but when you've come to that stage, when you've talked about the succession plans, you've talked about the development requirements, you've talked about the steps that you need to make and the moves you need to make across business. This is something that's typically organizations really struggle with. It's making sure that you execute on that, and there's no excuses. That's where most things fail. And that's actually really exciting, because if you come in and have a look at that, and start to focus on 2 or 3 things to get the talent strategy working well, and resolve those, and then move on to the next couple, rather than trying to fix everything, because you'll never do it. That's when it starts to get really excited, and the business will get really excited about it as well.
Yeah. Well, there's loads to unpack there, and I'm so grateful for you giving us your time today. I'm going to finish with one last question, which is what we ask all of our guests, and it's a bit more of a personal question. So,
Okay.
and we're going to stick with the advice theme, which is if you were to start your career again, and you were talking to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Take risks. Can I have more than one, Dan?
Of course.
Take risks and have fun.
Take risks and have fun.
So we're not
I can fit together.
We're not around for a very long time on this planet, and work is such a big part of your life. If you're working in an organization and you're waking up in the morning and you don't want to go in and you're not enjoying the work, then you need to get out. Yeah. Go and try something new. Go and just follow your passions and stick your hand up and take a few risks and have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the point where I always challenge back and say, are you living by your own advice now?
There's been a couple of times when I haven't, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It's a really good challenge, Dan. It's really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of times when I've hung in there because I thought that I was going to be able to make a difference, and I should have probably not even stepped into the ring.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am now.
Yeah. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Andy, and I'm so appreciative again of you spending some time with us today.
No,
so,
thank you.
yeah, well, no, it's been great, and I will allow you to get back to your day. So that just leaves me to say that if you'd like to find out any more about the work that either Impact do or Andy does, then you'll find all the links that you need to connect with either of us in the description of where you found today's episode. And of course, that also means that if you haven't yet seen some of our back catalogue, then you can go and find us on YouTube, Spotify, and other places where you get your podcasts. So that just remains me to thank Andy MacGovern for joining me again today. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Dan. It's been really good.
It has, hasn't it? Thank you. And until the next time, take care.